Welcome to our Interview with Impact tutorial series. In this tutorial, we're going to look at the most common interview questions and how to answer them using the STAR technique. There are many types of interviews: one-on-one, video, phone, panel, but you're likely to get the same kinds of questions. By doing a little work ahead of time, you'll be ready for whatever questions they throw your way. And regardless of the question types, there are 3 key rules of interviewing that you'll need to remember when answering. Let's take a look. The first is that you should be positive. You'll be asked questions about negative things, like a time when you failed or trouble with a coworker. You'll want to frame negative experiences as challenges and opportunities and avoid saying bad things about former employers or coworkers. For example, you could say, "It was challenging because not everyone in the group contributed equally," instead of saying, "My group members were really lazy." The second rule is that you need to remain professional. Your posture, language, and topics should be professional at all times. And third, your answers need to focus on the company. Your responses should show the skills, experience, attitude, or abilities that you will bring to the role. One of the most common types of interview questions is the behavioral question. Past performance is usually the best predictor of future performance, so these questions aim at learning about your past behaviors or performance in specific work situations. These questions start with, "Tell me about a time when," or "Give me an example of." While specific technical skills or abilities are important to the job, employers are most interested in your transferable skills, the competencies that are critical for doing any job well, like communication, problem solving, and initiative. Companies ask behavioral questions to get an idea of your skills in those areas. In this question, tell me about a time when you needed to get information from someone who wasn't very responsive. They're looking for an example that shows your communication and interpersonal skills. With most jobs, the best source of inside information is the job posting. In this example, there are several mentions of organization, planning, and dealing with customers, so you can bet there will be questions about your experience dealing with those things. In these questions, interviewers are looking for a specific example, not an opinion, philosophy, or a generic thought. You can draw on any experiences like internships or part-time jobs, sports team participation, group projects, volunteer experience, and so on. Use a variety of these, particularly if you don't have a lot of work experience. Avoid just using examples of schoolwork or projects because that will reinforce your image as a student, not as a professional. You want to provide specific details. These questions are not the kind that take only a few seconds to answer. Your response should be thorough but concise. Aim for about 1 to 2 minutes. And remember rule number 1, be positive. Make sure the example shows you in a positive light. It's a lot to communicate in 1 to 2 minutes. Fortunately, there's a framework that will help you include all of the critical information. Many recruiters and human resources professionals are trained in this framework, so it's what they'll expect for a good answer. Let's take a look at the STAR approach. STAR. First, describe the situation. Where and when. Then, specify the task, what you were asked to do. Explain your action, what you did and why, like decisions, judgments, and justifications. And finally, share the result. What was the outcome, and most importantly, what did you learn? Let's look at an example. Tell me about a time when you successfully worked on the team. First, you're going to say the situation. When I was working at McDonald's, I was assigned to a team asked to build the perfect burger. That's the task. First, we started by discussing how we each define the perfect burger. Then we talked about the most commonly ordered burger, those are all the actions. And finally, the result. It took us 3 months, but the burger we designed was the highest selling burger ever, with 50% of customers ordering it. So is this a good STAR response to the question, describe a time when you showed good leadership? I think the key to effective leadership is compassion, understanding what goes on inside people and being able to respond with empathy. No, the interviewer is looking for a specific example, and this is just an opinion. It might be a good introduction to an example that shows compassion, though. How about this one? Tell me about a time you had to deal with a crisis. When the power went out, I was sure it would be out for the rest of the day. So rather than have people sit around, I sent them home. An hour later, it was up and running again. Naturally, we lost time and money that day. Nope, This shows a situation, an action, and a result, but it isn't a good response. It certainly doesn't show the candidate in a positive way. Don't forget rule number 1. How about this one? Give an example of when communication was key to success. And the answer? I was part of the negotiating team for my department when we negotiated our last contract. Let me tell you, the bargaining on this was tough. No one wanted to give an inch, but in the end, we got them to agree to most of our demands. This one's a little trickier. It does give a situation and a good result, but it isn't a good response. First of all, it doesn't give details on the candidate's actions. What was their role? What did they do? But most of all, it doesn't answer the question. The interviewer wants to know about communication skills, and this doesn't provide any information that demonstrates this. And how about this? Describe a time when you had to make a decision that wasn't popular. This is a pretty long response, so pause the video to read it in full. Yes, this is a good star response. It covers all the important points: the situation, the task, the actions, and the result. Even though it is a negative question, it shows the candidate in a positive light. It also shows that the candidate is ethical and will take care of something even if it is difficult or uncomfortable. It gives some detail about what the candidate actually did, but since this answer is about 45 seconds long, there is time to provide a bit more detail, like some metrics about attendance. So a few more tips. If you don't understand the question, ask, "Can you rephrase the question?" or say, "I don't understand the question. Can you rephrase it?" If you do not have an example of the situation they asked you about, tell them so and then explain what you would do in that situation and why. For example, if they ask you about a time you had to deal with an irate customer, you could say something like, "I've been fortunate that I haven't been in that situation before. But if I did encounter that situation, I would first listen to the customer and so on." You may need to think a moment to recall a situation. It's okay to pause to collect your thoughts. 5 seconds of silence feels like a long time, but an interviewer won't mind if you do this on some of the questions. Just say something like, "That's a good question. Let me think a moment." One of the toughest things about interviewing is having to come up with answers under pressure. But you can reduce the pressure by thinking of examples beforehand. So here is your action plan. Before your interview, think of an example for each of these 10 situations, which cover the critical competencies of communication, problem solving, goal setting, initiative, conflict management, teamwork, leadership, organization, time management, and resilience. Once you have your examples, think through and make sure you can address all of the elements of the STAR framework: situation, task, actions, and results. Then, write down keywords in your Padfolio that you are going to take into your interview. Jotting a phrase or word will help prime your memory when you're asked a question. But don't write down full answers because it will be very obvious that you're reading them. Armed with good examples and the STAR framework, you are ready to handle those behavioral questions and show how you are the ideal candidate for the job. Now be sure to check out our other tutorials on resumes, interviewing, networking, and more. Good luck!